When Prejudice Meets Female Strength. My hand trembled as I slammed it against Dr. Peterson's chest, the words burning in my throat like acid. You will not take credit for my work again. The laboratory fell silent, equipment humming in the background as every eye turned to us. 10 years of silent compromise and professional humiliation had culminated in this moment. I knew my career at the prestigious Cambridge Research Institute might end today, but I could no longer bear the weight of invisibility. If you think this confrontation ended my scientific career, you need to watch until the end. What happened next changed not only my professional path, but reshaped how I view power, identity, and my place in a world that wasn't built for women like me. My name is Dr. Priya Sharma, and I'm a molecular biologist specializing in gene therapy for rare autoimmune diseases. I earned my doctorate from the Indian Institute of Science with highest honors before receiving the International Science Fellowship that brought me to Cambridge 7 years ago. In those 7 years, I've published 14 papers, developed 2 patented treatment protocols, and watched male colleagues with half my qualifications advance past me repeatedly. Dr. James Peterson was my department head, a man whose reputation had been built partially on my unacknowledged discoveries. He had a talent for presenting my research as collaborative work, where his contributions were mysteriously emphasized during presentations to the board. 3 times, he had subtly altered authorship orders on papers before submission. Twice, he had forgotten if to mention my name during international conference presentations of my work. That morning, I had discovered his latest betrayal while reviewing the quarterly funding report. The breakthrough therapy I had developed for Sjogren's syndrome, work that had consumed 18 months of my life, including weekends and countless nights away from my daughter, had been submitted for additional funding under his primary investigatorship. My name appeared 5th on the application, listed as a supporting researcher. I confronted him in the lab, where he was showing a visiting pharmaceutical executive around, a Dr. Reeves from Merck who might offer substantial funding. Could we discuss this later, Dr. Sharma? Peterson's voice carried that familiar condescending tone he reserved for female colleagues. We're in the middle of something rather important. I believe discussing scientific theft is important, Dr. Peterson, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The Sjogren's protocol is my work. I designed the viral vector delivery system, I identified the genetic markers, and I ran every trial, alone. He laughed, actually laughed, and turned to Dr. Reeves. You'll have to excuse Dr. Sharma. The research culture in India is quite different. They have unusual ideas about collaborative attribution. The casual racism stunned me to silence momentarily. 7 years in England, and still my nationality was used to undermine my professional standing. I looked at Dr. Reeves, who appeared uncomfortable but remained silent, the familiar posture of those who witness discrimination but find intervention too inconvenient. This has nothing to do with my nationality and everything to do with academic integrity, I said, feeling heat rise to my face. You've systematically taken credit for my work since I joined this department. I have documentation of every instance. Peterson's expression hardened. Perhaps we should discuss your performance issues in private. Dr. Sharma? Your emotional approach to scientific discourse has been concerning to many of your colleagues. Emotional? I didn't recognize my own voice. Is defending my intellectual property emotional? Would you use that word if I were a man? That's when he placed his hand on my shoulder, attempting to guide me away from Dr. Reeves, as though I were a child having a tantrum. The condescension in that gesture, the physical manifestation of years of professional diminishment, broke something inside me. I pushed his hand away and planted mine firmly against his chest. You will not take credit for my work again. The lab froze. In that moment, I saw my career disintegrating. My visa status, my ability to support my daughter, my scientific reputation. In Cambridge's polite academic environment, such confrontations simply didn't happen, especially not from Indian women toward powerful white department heads. Peterson's face reddened. Dr. Sharma, you're dismissed for the day. We'll discuss your future at this institution tomorrow morning, with HR present. I knew what that meant. I would be painted as unstable, unprofessional, difficult. The angry ethnic woman stereotype would be leveraged against me, regardless of the legitimacy of my complaints. But then something unexpected happened. Dr. Reeves, the pharmaceutical representative who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Actually, I'd be very interested to see Dr. Sharma's documentation. Her voice was calm but firm. Merck takes research attribution very seriously in our partnerships. Peterson's expression flickered between anger and panic. Lauren, this is an internal matter. It's a matter of scientific integrity, Dr. Reeves interrupted. And if Merck is considering a multi-million-dollar investment in this research, we need absolute clarity on who developed the protocols. She turned to me. Dr. Sharma, do you have your documentation readily available? I nodded, my heart pounding. Everything is organized chronologically in my office. I'd like to see it before we proceed further, Dr. Reeves said, then looked directly at Peterson. All funding partnerships require due diligence, James. I'm sure you understand. For the first time since I'd known him, Dr. Peterson appeared genuinely afraid. His career advancement, his reputation, his future funding, all suddenly in jeopardy. The power dynamic had shifted in an instant. What I didn't know then was that this confrontation would spiral into something much larger than a dispute over one research project. By the end of the week, 3 other women researchers would come forward with similar stories. By the end of the month, the Institute would launch a formal investigation that would ultimately reshape attribution policies across the entire research center. But in that moment, standing in the lab with my career hanging by a thread, I only knew one thing with certainty. I would no longer participate in my own erasure, no matter the cost. As I led Dr. Reeves to my office to show her my documentation, I caught sight of my reflection in the laboratory glass. My mother's gold necklace visible against my sari blouse, the same necklace she wore while defending her doctoral thesis 30 years earlier in Delhi. In that reflection, I saw not just my own struggle, but the continuation of a battle fought by generations of women scientists before me. The weight of that legacy straightened my spine as I walked forward, prepared to fight not just for my own recognition, but for every woman who would come after me. Dr. Reeves followed me to my office in silence, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor of the research wing. I could feel curious eyes following us. News travels fast in research institutions, and my confrontation with Peterson would already be spreading through department messaging channels. My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked my office door, but I refused to let her see my fear. My office was meticulously organized, a necessity when you're constantly trying to prove your worth. Every project had its own color-coded binder. Every experiment was documented with obsessive precision. This thoroughness, once born from scientific rigor, had evolved into a defense mechanism in an environment where my work was routinely questioned or appropriated. The Sjogren's research is in the blue binders, I said, gesturing to a shelf where 3 thick binders stood. Every experiment, every result, every consultation. My lab notebooks are in the cabinet with the original data. Dr. Reeves nodded and began examining the materials while I pulled up emails on my computer. Messages where Peterson had altered authorship, requests for changes that diminished my contributions, congratulatory department-wide announcements that somehow failed to mention my name. For years, I had archived everything, sensing that someday I would need proof. You've been very thorough, Dr. Reeves said after 20 minutes of review. I had to be. The words came out more bitter than I intended. She looked up at me. How long has this been happening? With Dr. Peterson? Since I arrived. But he's not the only one. I hesitated, then decided I had nothing left to lose. This institution has a pattern of diminishing contributions from women and international researchers, especially when we're both. Dr. Reeves set down the binder. Dr. Sharma, Priya, if I may, why have you stayed? The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me that before. My daughter, I said after a moment. Anya is 12. The International Fellowship provides her education at Westminster Academy. If I leave, if I'm dismissed. I didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what was at stake. I see. Something in her expression softened. Tell me about the viral vector delivery system. The report says it achieved 78% efficacy in human tissue samples. For the next hour, Dr. Reeves questioned me about the research itself, not as a test, but with genuine scientific curiosity. For the first time in years, I found myself discussing my work with someone who valued the science above politics, who asked questions because they wanted to understand, not to expose weaknesses. The tension in my shoulders began to ease as I explained the breakthrough that had allowed us to target specific genetic markers in autoimmune responses. "This is remarkable work," she said finally, "and clearly yours." She closed the binder and looked at me directly. "Merck won't be partnering with Cambridge on this project under Dr. Peterson's leadership." My heart sank. Despite everything, I believed in this research. Without funding, the treatment might never reach patients who desperately needed it. "And however," she continued, "we would be very interested in funding this research under your leadership, potentially with a joint appointment between Cambridge and our research division." I stared at her, unable to fully process her words. "Assuming, of course, that the attribution issues are properly addressed," she added. Before I could respond, my office door opened without a knock. Dr. Peterson stood there, flanked by Professor Williams, the institute director. "Lauren, there you are," Peterson said, his voice artificially warm. "Richard and I thought we might continue our discussion about the partnership in his office." "Actually, James, I've been reviewing Dr. Sharma's documentation," Dr. Reeves replied coolly. "I think we all need to have a very different conversation." Professor Williams looked between us, his expression guarded. As institute director, he had always maintained a careful distance from departmental politics. "Perhaps my office would be appropriate for whatever needs to be discussed," he suggested. 20 minutes later, I found myself in the spacious corner office of the institute director E, seated across from Peterson I with Dr. Reeves beside me and Professor Williams behind his imposing desk. The view of Cambridge's historic spires through the window seemed to mock the ugly confrontation unfolding inside. "These are serious allegations, Dr. Sharma," Professor Williams said, after Dr. Reeves had summarized what she'd discovered. "They aren't allegations. They're documented facts," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Peterson leaned forward. "This is absurd. Research is collaborative by nature. Dr. Sharma was part of a team that I led." "A team?" I interrupted, sliding forward a specific email. "This message from February clearly states that you instructed the journal to move your name to first author position after I had submitted the manuscript. The paper was based on experiments you never even witnessed." Professor Williams reviewed the email, his expression darkening. "James, editorial decisions are made based on overall contribution to the field. My reputation lent credibility to the work," Peterson replied, his confidence visibly wavering. "That's not how scientific authorship works, and you know it," Dr. Reeves said quietly. The meeting continued for another hour, with each piece of evidence further eroding Peterson's position. When Professor Williams finally suggested we reconvene the following day, after he'd had time to review all the documentation, Peterson's face had lost its color entirely. If you've ever faced discrimination or had your work taken without credit, share your experience in the comments. What did you do? How did you handle it? Your story might give someone else the courage they need. As I walked to my car that evening, exhaustion settled over me like a heavy cloak. The adrenaline that had carried me through the day dissipated, leaving me hollow. I had potentially saved my research, but possibly destroyed my workplace relationships in the process. The academic world runs on connections and recommendations. What would this mean for my future? My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patel, our neighbor who watched Anya after school. "She's eaten dinner. Doing homework now. Everything okay? You're late today." I texted back a quick apology and drove home in a daze, the familiar streets of Cambridge blurring past. Our small apartment in the eastern part of the city was warm and bright when I entered, the scent of Mrs. Patel's cooking still lingering in the air. "Mama." Anya looked up from her mathematics homework, her smile dissolving when she saw my face. At 12, she had become perceptive about my moods. "What's wrong?" "Just a difficult day at work, Betty I said, setting down my bag and kissing the top of her head. Mrs. Patel gathered her things, giving me a concerned look before leaving us alone. As soon as the door closed, Anya asked, "Was it Dr. Peterson again?" I froze. I had never discussed workplace problems with my daughter. always careful to shield her from adult concerns. Why would you ask that? I managed. Anya closed her textbook. You talk in your sleep sometimes, and I've seen how you change when he calls, even on weekends. Your voice gets all tight. Children see more than we realize. I sat beside her, uncertain how much to share. Yes, it involved Dr. Peterson, but I stood up for myself today. Her eyes widened. Really? What did you do? I considered sanitizing the story but decided against it. If I wanted to raise a strong daughter, I needed to show her what strength looked like, even when it was messy. And I confronted him, in front of others, because he was taking credit for work that I did. Were you scared? She asked. Terrified, I admitted. But sometimes doing the right thing is more important than being afraid. She thought about this for a moment. Like Rani Lakshmibai. I smiled, touched that she remembered the stories I'd told her about the warrior queen who had led her people against British colonial forces in 1857. Yes, something like that, on a much smaller scale. What will happen now? I don't know, I answered honestly. But whatever happens, we'll face it together. After Anya went to bed, I sat alone in our small living room, scrolling through messages from colleagues. Some expressed support, others uncomfortable neutrality. One message, from Dr. Zhang in the adjacent lab, particularly caught my attention. We should talk. You're not the only one. I stared at those words for a long time, a realization slowly dawning. Perhaps the most powerful form of prejudice was the one that isolated us, making each of us feel that our struggle was singular, unique, and therefore easier to dismiss. What if we refused that isolation? By midnight, I had exchanged messages with 3 female colleagues who had experienced similar issues with Peterson and others in the department. By 2 a.m., we had created a secure document where each of us detailed our experiences. By morning, we had a plan. What none of us realized then was that our small act of solidarity would ultimately expose a systemic problem that extended far beyond one department or one institution. We couldn't have known that within months, our documentation would trigger one of the largest investigations into academic attribution bias in the UK scientific community. All we knew that night was that we were no longer alone in our fight. The next morning, I dressed with particular care, selecting a formal teal silk sari that had belonged to my mother. As I draped the fabric, securing it with precise pleats, I recalled her words before my first international conference. Let them see your culture as your strength, not your limitation. The familiar weight of the silk felt like armor as I prepared to face what might be the most consequential day of my professional life. When I arrived at the institute, Dr. Kavita Mehta from Biological Systems was waiting in the lobby. An accomplished researcher with over 20 years of experience, Kavita had messaged me late last night with her own stories of diminished credit. You're not alone today, she said simply, falling into step beside me. As we approached the administrative wing, I saw Dr. Mei Zhang and Dr. Sofia Rodriguez already waiting outside Professor Williams' office. The sight of them, 3 senior female scientists from different departments, sent a clear message. This wasn't about one disgruntled researcher, it was about a pattern. When Professor Williams' assistant led us into the conference room, the director's surprise was evident. He had expected only me. I asked my colleagues to join us, I explained. Their experiences are relevant to the discussion. Dr. Peterson arrived moments later, faltering visibly when he saw the assembled group. Dr. Reeves was the last to enter, nodding professionally to everyone as she took a seat. What followed was the most extraordinary meeting of my scientific career. For 2 hours, each woman methodically presented her documentation of similar experiences, not just with Peterson, but with various senior colleagues. The pattern was undeniable. International women researchers were systematically excluded from credit, overlooked for advancement, and marginalized in decision-making, despite often generating the lab's most innovative work. This is larger than an individual grievance, Dr. Mehta concluded. And this is about institutional integrity. Professor Williams, to his credit, listened without interruption. When we finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I want to be very clear, he said finally. If these allegations, documentation, Dr. Rodriguez corrected firmly, not allegations, Williams nodded. If this documentation proves accurate, it represents a profound failure of leadership, including my own. I should have seen this pattern. He turned to Peterson, whose earlier confidence had completely evaporated. James, you're placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a formal investigation. Peterson began to protest, but Williams raised his hand. This isn't a discussion. Your lab will continue under Dr. Sharma's supervision until the investigation concludes. The meeting ended with Williams announcing the formation of an independent review committee to examine attribution practices across the entire institute. As we filed out, Dr. Reeves pulled me aside. Merck's offer stands, she said quietly, but I think you might have more important work to do here first. The weeks that followed tested every ounce of my resilience. As interim department head, I faced resentment from Peterson's allies and skepticism from colleagues who questioned my sudden authority. Each morning brought new challenges: researchers threatening to leave, funding agencies requesting reassurance, papers in limbo without their primary investigator. Yet for every obstacle, there was unexpected support. Junior researchers finally voiced innovative ideas they'd been hesitant to share under previous leadership. Administrative staff revealed backdated documentation that further confirmed the pattern of attribution bias. 3 additional women came forward with their own experiences. The most difficult moment came when the student newspaper published an article titled "Scientific Appropriation: A Culture of Silence Broken." Seeing our stories in print, even anonymized, made the situation impossible to ignore. The institute became the subject of intense scrutiny, with major scientific journals requesting statements and academic societies launching their own examinations of attribution practices. 6 weeks after our confrontation, the independent committee delivered its findings. Systematic bias existed across multiple departments, affecting primarily women and international researchers. Their recommendations were sweeping: new attribution guidelines, transparent promotion criteria, regular attribution audits, and mandatory leadership training on bias recognition. Peterson resigned before formal disciplinary action could be taken. 2 other department heads followed shortly after. When Professor Williams called me to his office to discuss the Sjogren's research, I expected to be asked to scale back our ambitions until the department stabilized. Instead, he slid a document across his desk. "The board has approved your appointment as permanent department head," he said. "Should you choose to accept?" I stared at the paper, thinking of all the late nights, the missed school events with Anya, the constant need to prove myself beyond what was expected of my male colleagues. "I have conditions," I said. Williams looked surprised but nodded for me to continue. Joint leadership positions for departments with over 15 researchers, transparent attribution protocols with regular audits, a mentorship program specifically for international women in research, and flexible working options for parent researchers. "That's ambitious," Williams replied. "So is finding a treatment for Sjogren's syndrome, or any of the work we do here." I met his gaze steadily. "Science advances through ambition, Professor Williams. Management should do the same." To my surprise, he smiled. "Draft the proposal. The board meets next Thursday." That evening, I picked Anya up from school myself, something I hadn't been able to do in months. "Are you in trouble at work?" she asked as we walked through Cambridge's historic center. "No," I said, realizing with some surprise that it was true. "Actually, I've been offered a promotion." Her face lit up. "Really? So you won today?" I thought about the long battle ahead, changing entrenched systems, rebuilding department morale, balancing leadership with research, all while navigating the complex dynamics of being the first woman of color to head a major department at the Institute. "It's not about winning, Betty I said carefully. "It's about changing things so that the next generation of scientists doesn't have to fight these same battles." She considered this as we crossed the river, watching punts glide by beneath the bridge. "Like planting trees you'll never sit under." Sometimes my daughter's wisdom took my breath away. Exactly like that. 3 months later, I stood at the podium during the International Autoimmunity Conference in Boston, presenting our breakthrough in Sjogren's treatment. The research had advanced significantly under the new departmental structure, with contributions from a diverse team properly credited in all publications. In the front row sat Dr. Reeves, who had become both a professional ally and personal friend. Beside her was Anya, attending her first scientific conference, her eyes wide with curiosity and pride. As I explained the viral vector delivery system that could potentially help millions of patients worldwide, I saw not just the culmination of years of research, but the beginning of something equally important, a scientific community where contribution mattered more than position, where diverse voices strengthened our collective work rather than being silenced by it. The standing ovation that followed my presentation wasn't just for the science, it was for every woman who had ever been dismissed, every international researcher made to feel like an outsider, every person who had found the courage to say, "My work matters, my voice matters, I matter." 1 year after my confrontation with Peterson, Cambridge Institute established the Equity and Attribution Initiative, which has since been adopted by 12 major research institutions across Europe. The program I began for mentoring international women researchers now supports over 40 scientists annually. And our Sjogren's treatment protocol has entered clinical trials, with promising early results. The path wasn't easy, and the work is far from complete. Systemic change never happens overnight. But when I walk through the Institute now, I see more diverse research teams, more transparent attribution practices, and more women in leadership positions than ever before. Sometimes, standing up against prejudice feels like shouting into a void. Sometimes it costs us professionally, personally, financially. But sometimes, just sometimes, it creates a fracture in the system that allows light to enter, illuminating a better way forward for everyone. If my story has inspired you, please subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, resilience, and change. Remember that your voice matters, your work matters, and one person standing firmly in their truth can transform an entire system. As my mother told me years ago when I doubted my path, they may ignore one woman speaking. They cannot ignore hundreds standing together. Today, I am no longer standing alone, and neither are you.